person here at Bookstore One, and you usually see Bryn at these events, but she happens to be in the North Country visiting, so she isn't here. And Georgia Court, our bookstore owner, is here this evening, and she's our videographer.
Yeah, such as it is, right?
So we have Tyler and Heather, and I'll briefly tell you about them. Tyler Gillespie. Are you related to the Gillespies from here?
I wish I'd have more money.
Oh,
I'd be able to afford a house in their park.
this might be true, Tyler. Well, keep searching. Go on Ancestry all the time. You never know. Is a fifth-generation Floridian who has written about the state for the Washington Post, GQ, Vice, Salon, The Nation, and The Guardian, among other places. He's the author of Florida Man Poems, The Thing About Florida, Exploring a Misunderstood State, and The Nature Machine. He's a founding member of the Florida Local Author and Writers Network and currently teaches writing at Ringling College. Heather Sellers, a Florida native. Oh my gosh. Florida people, this is very good and very unusual.
That's the whole act.
I love it. Is the author of 2 new poetry collections, Field Notes from the Flood Zone and The Present State of the Garden, as well as 2 previous collections, The Boys I Borrow and Drinking Girls and Their Dresses. How cool is that? Her popular textbook, The Practice of Creative Writing, is in its 4th edition, following 2 books on craft, page after page and chapter after chapter. She's written a children's book, Spike and Cubby's Ice Cream Island Adventure with Amy Young, and published numerous chapbooks, a collection of link short stories titled Georgia Underwater, and a memoir, You Don't Look Like Anyone I Know, featured in the Oprah magazine. Editor's Choice of the New York Times, her memoir was also featured on NPR, The Today Show, Good Morning America, and The Rachel Ray Show. I'll just interrupt. Which one was your favorite show?
Rachel.
You loved her? She's cool?
She was so smart.
Really? And nice?
So nice.
There you go, folks. All right. Her essay, Haywire, was selected for the Best American Essays by Leslie Jameson, and Pedal, Pedal, Pedal won a Pushcart Prize in 2018. She taught for many years at Hope College, where she was 2011 Hope Professor of the Year. Currently, she's director of the undergraduate and MFA creative writing programs at USF, where in 2017 she was awarded a university teaching award. And so you speak to audience about face blindness, and how do you say the word?
Prosopagnosia.
Because there's a book I read recently about that. It was a novel, actually, but how interesting is that? It was a mystery story, so, all right, see, we're going on and on now. Anyway, I will turn you over to the native Floridians.
Thank you for that introduction.
I think my professor said if you can't be good, be loud. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Is this okay?
Sure, you don't want your microphone then?
No,
this?
if it's okay.
So?
I sweat a lot and I'm afraid I'll electrocute Tyler. So I am so honored to read with my friend and my local Floridian, Tyler. I don't believe in genre. I don't care about it. You know, genre and gender share a word root. And I just don't care. I'm interested in the non-binary genres. Like, it makes bookstore owners crazy because where do you put these books? I don't care. So this book, my newest book is called Field Notes from the Flood Zone. And during the pandemic, I just wrote down everything I saw from my front door. Water's at the doorstep in St. Pete. And I don't think of them as poems, I just think of them as pieces. But the BOA, one of the best publishers of poetry, said, "We love your new poetry collection." I'm like, "Poem? Sold, definitely." So I'm gonna read a couple, just one piece. And again, it's a poem, it's an essay, a micro memoir. I don't really care. Oh, and my book just won the Florida Book Award, so I'm excited about that. I'm gonna open up for Tyler by reading a piece that is, it's voices. It's like 8 different people talking. It doesn't matter. You don't need to know who's talking if they're talking to each other. At night, I walk around my suburb and I just write down everything that everybody says. So this is that. I live in this community called Tampa Palms. It's built on the wetlands, and alligators originally planned it. We replanted it, and the piece is called Women in Tampa Palms Talking About Alligators. Well, the babies are super cute. I wanted so badly to raise a few on our lanai. In the end, we did not. You know, the mortality rate out there is incredibly high. Hungry males, they eat the offspring. Big eyes on those juveniles. They're just so stinking cute. Our neighbor lady from Long Island feeds them chicken, tosses chicken out in the swamp, and you know the swamp comes to the edge of our pools. Finally, one night, my husband just went off on her. That's how people get eaten. Y'all stop feeding them. He pretty much lost his mind. I was out walking one night with my husband, and I noticed one of those white plastic bags from Publix floating in the pond by the fountain. I said, that's a shame, trash in this beautiful place. We got closer and I saw it wasn't a bag. He said, it's a large plastic bag. I said, nope, that is the hind end of a deer. He didn't believe me. Then we saw the gator, medium size. I would put about 5 foot, circling, eyes all big with those straight up pupils launching out of its head. Oh, they know when you're close by. They always know where we are. It circled and circled around the piece of deer floating there, all snapping its jaws at us. This is mine. Stay back. Yes, buddy. Do people out here not understand the danger? Do they not know about the death roll? Well, me, I live on the golf course. At night, we run the dogs there. We're careful. We're real careful. What we worry about is the divers hired by the club. They wear protection and thick rubber gloves when they dive to retrieve the golf balls out of the pond. But last year, one guy lost his hand, and then another one lost a piece of his shoulder. I'm absolute certain for a fact they've lost arms and feet too, but we just don't hear about it. So much is lost, but we get those golf balls. The sign clearly says, do not swim. Picture of a water moccasin, a snapper, and open-mouthed gator. But the kids, little kids, hanging out on the bank, fishing, up in the trees on those limbs over the pond, those kids just ready to fall in. I can't even look. Oh my God, where are the parents? That's my question. Where are the parents? In every single body of water in Florida, there's a giant alligator, and I can assure you, he is not alone. The retention ponds are all linked underground here. They travel freely using those underground rivers. That's all fact. 14-footer, just sunning on my lawn. Where I'm from, New Orleans, they will charge you. Here it seems so different. They like to just bask, I guess. But I cannot for the life of me understand people walking around so close to these creatures as if it's safe or normal. It was on my front lawn. Huge, huge. How do I get to my mailbox? I do not. Not that day. All I can think about is the death roll. You do not have a chance, not even on land do you have a chance. They're an ambush predator. Remember when that woman's dog broke loose on Belmont? I think her name's Cassandra. They've got all those little wiener dogs. And she was screaming at the edge of the pond on the boulevard because that little mottled one, is it diseased or it's just like that? I don't know. But it looks like a snack. I mean, it had slipped its collar and it was paddling around in the water. Looks like a snack. I could see the granddaddy gator that lives in that pond creeping across the surface. I would put it at a fast creep. She's standing with her empty leash screaming, and that Japanese man who lives in what's-her-name's old place. A lot of people have died in that house of cancer. You know, I would not live in that house personally. I would not. Anyway, the Japanese man was taking up his trash can, and he must have heard the screaming because I saw him run back to his house. I have never seen an older gentleman move that fast. He brought his dog out, you know, that medium-sized dog he's got. It turns out it's best friends with the little dog. And that man's dog knew. He knew the danger, and from the edge, he got the little dog to come up when no one else could. Gator disappeared, but he was so close, and you know he's still out there. Remember that massive one that broke into the house in Safety Harbor and got into their wine collection? It was on the national news. All those broken wine bottles were everywhere. Maybe the people weren't home. I think a lot of destruction can happen just from the tail. Yeah, they're removed if they're aggressive, but they're rehoused, aren't they? You can't kill them. Weren't they in danger? No, if someone calls it, then it's a nuisance alligator and a woman comes out. It used to be her and her husband, but he died in a helicopter accident. She has all the padding and the wrist protection and all the special equipment. I've seen it many times. Everyone gathers. She baits this great hook with the chicken. Then the hook goes in their mouth and they go to cache. You know, they cache their food in the side of the pond. And she drags that thing out with a pulley system. I hate the humiliation. She binds the feet. She binds the mouth. She ties the food together. She does it all by herself. It's a terrible thing to see. They haven't really done anything wrong. So where I live now, in Tampa Palms proper, we have an HOA. They take them away in cranes. These great black rubber saddles. We were told they were set free in the river or taken down to Wamauma. I picture a kind of wonderful retirement. Food brought to you, dozing in the sun. Am I making that up? Is that not what happens? No? Seriously? They're euthanized? Euthanized for what? For living? Thank you. And now, Tyler Gillespie.
Hello. Okay. I love a microphone, so I'm going to use it.
I knew you would.
Thank you so much for that reading. And, you know, that's the thing. Someone said, you know, what makes Florida literature? Well, there needs to be a hurricane, and I feel like there needs to be an alligator. That's just my personal thought. So I'm going to start off by reading a couple poems that are not actually in the book, since you all already bought one anyway. But I'll, of course, read from the poems. But I want to kind of set a framework for us to talk about poetry a little bit later. And so recently, actually yesterday, I was commissioned to write a poem for St. Pete Pride. And thinking about everything that's going on right now in terms of prides being canceled and this really kind of heavy moment, it feels important to me to do a good job, which usually I don't think about when I'm writing a poem about doing a good job. So I'm gonna read you two poems that they're in progress, right? But I'm probably going to send both of them to the editor and just see what happens. So this poem is called "We Crawled from the Ocean to Get to This Beach. Then argued over who can sit on the sand. I mean, I may not know much about science, but weren't we all in the same primordial goo? Didn't we all have to adapt to land and language? I never learned the details. My Southern Baptist school taught us God spoke humans into existence, and there'd be more dust on the moon if science were true. Animals like me went to hell for our pride in doing what we do. I wanted to change, so I pressed my ear to the shell. I only heard you. 1,000,000 years later, and this storm is nothing new, so we'll continue to link arms in its waves, because this is our Florida too. Okay. And the second poem that is about pride is called Pinellas Queen. I'm from Pinellas County, Largo, live in St. Pete now. At first, this poem wanted to trace sunshine, state homophobia, from the Johns Committee in the 50s to Anita Bryant's later Save Our Children campaign. It connected Florida's history to our present and made a political statement about voting and boycotting and demanding change. At first, this poem wanted to be scholarly, but then it heard the thumpa-thumpa music of a parade. So it put on a wig, lipstick, and shimmied onto the street next to other Pinellas queens and those who stand against the red tide. This poem danced all day. It got sweaty and flirted, may have even consensually made out with another poem who understood its form. The day helped this poem remember we're no crushed fruit, and the joy of being together is resistance itself. Thank you. Okay, so maybe I'll just submit that one. Thank y'all for helping me workshop those poems. It's been heavy on my heart, right? Especially with everything that's going on in Sarasota as well, right? I teach at Ringling, which is in a different situation than New College and USF, where Heather works. And I teach LGBTQ writing this past semester, which is a course that other state universities wouldn't be able to even teach in the future. Okay, so this is my new book, has an alligator on it. It is called The Nature Machine, and a little bit about its form. I wrote a lot of it during the pandemic, right? So right during the beginning of quarantine was weirdly coincided with April, which is Poetry Month, and I'm in a poetry group, so we were writing poems a day. And it was also during the time I was finishing up my coursework. I'm getting a PhD in writing, rhetoric, and technical communication. I'm defending my dissertation in June 6th, exciting. But we were reading a lot of language theory and all this like highbrow stuff that I was having a hard time understanding. So a lot of the times when I'm writing poems, when I don't understand something, is when I turn to poetry, because I feel like poetry doesn't ask anything of me. I don't have any expectations of it. And it's a place to be associative and to think through things. That's how I think about it. So I did section the book into 3 sections, and it thinks specifically about nature in terms of the physical land around us, our internal nature, and then cyber, like the internet as a different kind of nature. All of these things our bodies are interacting with, adapting to. So that's kind of the impulse of the book. I'm gonna read the first couple poems. I was also writing about Britney Spears during this time. But the reason why, though, it also had to do with grad school. I was doing research on the Free Britney movement and thinking about, which was a digital campaign that a lot of students were using hashtags and different what we call rhetorical strategies. My friend is here, hey. So we were doing research on how these younger folks were helping Britney Spears' cause, someone we think who has a lot of power because of her fame, but was in a conservatorship for a while, right? So I was also studying the practices, but she punctuates the poem, she starts every section, and we'll talk a little bit more about craft later, but that's kind of what we have going on. Okay, and if you like to follow along when somebody's reading, this is the opening poem on page 5. Britney Spears argues a specific worldview, posits. Britney Spears argues a specific worldview, posits, only 2 types of people exist. The ones that entertain and the ones that observe. Other theorists may disagree. Judith Butler et al. Recognize the performed nature of gender. So who isn't performing? And we trace poetry's roots to song, to orality, etc., etc., etc. Britney's binary might seem reductive, but her framework proves useful for us to consider the active/passive nature of existence, the inaction of choice, consequence of being. She asserts, it's better to dance, entertain, than to stand, observe. I'm usually against such absolutism and judgment, but if pressed yesterday, I would have agreed. Today, though, I'm not so sure. Okay, so this is the second poem, and it's called, I feel like if you're writing and you need to make yourself chuckle a little bit with your titles at times, I feel. It's called, If You Love Mark So Much, Then Why Don't You Marry Him? If you love Mark so much, then why don't you marry him? Is the last thing I say to my boyfriend before I slam the door and go out for a walk. When I get back, he is gone and has stopped following me on Instagram. I consult a deck of tarot cards for spiritual guidance, pull the Ace of Pentacles. I don't know what that means. I cannot read tarot. Only bought the cards for aesthetic reasons. Long ago, I put faith in glamour. So I light a cigarette inside because I saw Carrie Bradshaw do it on TV. I do not inhale because of my grandmother. Listen, queer people don't have the best relationship models. I say to her over the phone. She replies, neither do straight people. My grandmother stayed married to my grandfather for 40 years longer than she wanted to. Southern Baptist ladies don't get divorced. She never smoked even one cigarette in her life, but she still got COPD from his secondhand smoke. All right. Okay. I'm like, are we feeling saucy? Do we want to read like a saucy poem? Yes. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, just vibe check. It's called, my saucy poems are about grammar, so it's fine. It's called, I'm turned on by grammar. At times I'm a sub. I'm turned on by grammar. At times I'm a sub, ordinate clause, and passive. While usually I'm more active, voice, and my performance. Some theorists argue all semiotic features, like a big-ass dash, are meaningful choices. But I identify with the comma, splice. Sometimes I don't know when or where I fit in, and I hope I'm not being too forward. Is it okay if I verb my adjective noun? Preposition noun? Verb sometime? I totally understand if you adverb verbally. Not everyone finds a run-on sentence as sexy as I do. It keeps going and going and going and going and going until it finally comes to a full stop. Thank you. Yes, sexy poems about grammar, you know? There's an audience for it. Okay, so now I'm gonna go to the second part of the book so y'all get a little flavor of the book. Skipping some of them, so y'all have to read them. But I also wanna show you, I do use QR codes throughout the text. So something like that I was thinking a lot of during the quarantine is, you know, physically, I quarantined with my grandmother for a year. I was teaching at Ole Miss, but we were teaching online. So I moved back to Largo. I quarantined with my grandmother. I saw the same alligators every day in this nearby park. She had COPD, right? So I didn't leave the house except for to walk around the park. So I was thinking a lot. I had a long-term partner at the time and we didn't see each other for 2 years. I barely saw my mom. Like, I was taking it super seriously. So I was thinking about how technology changes our relationships and also thinking about how it changes language and what a poem can look like. So I had a podcast. I was doing a lot of weird things, right, as a lot of us were. And so then I have some audio poems in here. So you will scan the QR code and it will take you to a robot reading you a poem. You know, why not? But it also will take you to video poems and just different things like that. So that's what the function of the QR code is doing. Okay. I'm not a conspiracy theorist in a traditional sense, but I believe everything is possible. Aliens, duh. The Loch Ness, Bigfoot, swamp ape, Elon Musk thinks we live in a computer simulation, a video game. It would seem the odds we're in base reality is 1 in billions. I fell into a YouTube hole on reptilians, lizard people sent to Earth. They walk among us, give glimpses, a webbed hand, yellowed pupil slits. The universe is infinite. Like, can you even comprehend eternity? Because I can't. Who's to say this isn't a video game? Or there is no God? Or that love will find a way? Or that it will tear us apart? Oh, thank you, yes. Feel free to clap. Or not. Feel free to do whatever you want. That's what these poems are doing. I'm just gonna read 2 more poems and then we can talk. I'm actually gonna read this poem called Reptilian. So something that I really think intentionally about is the sequencing of poems, and because I'm a prose writer and a poet, like I'm a genreless. I like to say I'm in an ethically not monogamous relationship with genre, right? Like, whatever. But I agree, but what I think about in terms of what a book can give us in a way that single poems can't is the opportunity for callbacks, for themes emerging, for payoffs, right? So I think really a kind of sequencing in terms of arc. And so the third part that I'm gonna read from is about, it's called Bird, and one of the poems is called Bird is definitely not a metaphor for writing about recovery, which means that it definitely is, right? So I talk about recovery in this third part, and people usually want to talk to me after the readings, either about recovery or alligators. Those are like my 2 main things, you know, right? But also alligator is a metaphor for recovery, but. So this is called Reptilian, which I just kind of read about in the last poem. Reptilians either evolved on Earth and left when they mastered intergalactic space travel, or they're from a planet in the Draco constellation and flew here to imprison all humans. I learned this on YouTube. Fell into a video hole of people dissecting movie stills in which reptilians give glimpses of their true form, like Keanu Reeves did a few times in The Matrix. It's all very scientific. Example, in one scene, Keanu's hand looks webbed, and the YouTuber pointed this out as proof of his real scaly reptile body masquerading as a humanoid. And not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I know what you might think. You might think I'm using reptilian as a metaphor for addiction, because our own reptilian brain, basal ganglia and brainstem connects our past to birds. It's one of the most ancient parts of our bodies, keeps our heart beating, our lungs breathing, even in a blackout. This brain let me time travel through space, from the night's party to a different party, and back again, all while you waited for me to come home. And to think, that is my true nature. I've been an addict for 1,000,000 years. It's all stardust, baby. Oh, but who am I kidding? That's the reptilian talking. He wants to regain control of this body, this planet, so I give glimpses of my webbed hands to remind myself there are scales under my skin, waiting for me to forget how I got here. Thank you. I'm actually gonna read 2 more poems, because I never, thank you. I don't like to read sad poems at readings. I like to have a little bit more fun, but I wanna read a sad poem, if that's okay. Okay, it's called A Theorist Argues Elon Musk is an F-boy of Science. A theorist argues Elon Musk is an F-boy of science. Allegedly, he tried to buy the moon, our first poem. Other theorists say poetry emerged much later and the metaphysical, through human interaction with nature. They argue symbols can destabilize norms as language forms and upholds power. These philosophers urge us to get over the moon and write about less cliche topics. I, however, disagree. It's the fucking moon. No one can own the moon, but if anyone is going to try, it should at least be the poets. Yesterday, I would have wanted to make a more cogent argument on the function of art and aesthetics. Tonight, though, I can't. I'm looking at the first full moon of summer, and it's devastating to know that I am still here in the physical, while you, darling, are not. Okay, and then I'm not gonna read this poem, but the next one is a QR poem, and it's called Scraps from Earlier Drafts of A Theorist Argues Elon Musk is an F-boy of science, or Behind the Scenes of a Poem About Grief. So I basically just used all the scraps from the earlier drafts of the poem, ran them through this text to voice generator, and I don't know, it produced this really affecting like moment. So you can go listen to that if you want. But now I'm gonna end on a more lighter note. It's a love poem. And it's called Pickup Line. You're so handsome, I want us to leave this bar and hold hands in my car. We'll skip all the steps to my apartment. You'll look at the Dali print in my living room and hesitate before you tell me a secret. You don't like the surrealists. They aren't real painters. I'll laugh seagulls as I cut limes for a nightcap, listen to the knife, make love to the rind. I'll tell you about the time Hugh Jackman asked me for directions. You'll tell me about the time you caught your father cheating. I'm sorry I'm a liar, I'll say. Is it hot in here, you'll say, or is it just you? I'll put on a sweater, then a coat. You'll tell me I'm funny without trying. When the Joni record stops, we'll make our way to my bedroom. I'll ask you to read the poems you write during breaks, at the factory, or wherever it is that you work. You'll tell me you usually don't do this kind of thing. Nervously, you'll unzip your bag, pull out a notebook, show me your pages. They're so wonderful, I'll say, and mean it. I'll ask you to read them again, again, and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. That was wonderful. I love your work so much. And I thought we would have a little conversation. I'll ask you some questions and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. But just so you know, it has to be an actual question, not your sharing time. Tyler wrote the book, so he's gonna get to talk tonight. So I want to start with craft. You were talking a moment ago about how you took the scraps of earlier drafts and fed them into a poem, and you just wrote 2 poems fairly quickly. And you're so productive. I don't know if y'all know Tyler's book of essays. It's wonderful. I try to dress to match the cover whenever I can. It's just fantastic work, and a dissertation, and you do letterpress. You're so productive. Could you talk a little bit about process and then also how you make a poem?
So I think that everything interacts with itself, right? I was thinking about that, right? And usually, so when I started, I'll give a little bit, plug for this book. Yes, Heather, like buy this one too, why not? But this one is like a nonfiction book of essays. And so there's archival research in there, there's journalistic interviews, because I have a training as a journalist. I was a journalist for like 8 years, and there's pieces of memoir throughout. And so I started writing that at the end of my MFA program, and actually like in the last semester, and then I moved back home to write the book. And then after that happened, the Pulse shooting happened like the month after I moved back home, and I went to UCF, and I knew people who were there that night. And so immediately I went to Orlando and I covered it as a journalist, and after I wrote about it, and I got depressed basically, right, for a while. And so like I kind of mentioned earlier, the essays asked me to do different things. They asked me to have an argument, a point, a reason to exist, just for me, not saying, whatever I'm saying is just for me in this moment. do whatever you want to do. But this, for me, essays need to have a driving point, and I just didn't have any answers about Florida. In a similar way that I'm feeling now, actually, right? So turning to poetry. So then I turned to the poems to ask questions, and that's where the Florida Man poems book came out of and emerged. So that's how things interact for me. If I'm stuck on one project, I like to have multiple things going so I can go to different projects. And like, for example, the letterpress that I recently started doing, that we did a class together, is a tactile thing. So your brain is always processing the work, even if you're not focused on it. And sometimes I think that that's the best way to work through issues that I'm having in the writing. So that was kind of how those things interact. And then academic writing, oh Lordy, I don't know how I pushed through that. I did include some poems in the dissertation, which was like wild, but like I had to do it, But yeah, so those are kind of how those things worked. But I think as someone who is genreless, academic writing is a very specific genre that is difficult for me to work in. But anyway, those are how those things kind of influence each other.
So it's so rare to have a poet who is also a really respected scholar, and you're so interested in teaching. There are so few professors who are really interested in talking about teaching. And that's one of the places we first bonded. Can you talk a little bit more about how teaching is a creative act?
I love that question. And I just also remembered, so thinking about craft, there's this poet named C.D. Wright, right? Okay, so in grad school, I was a nonfiction writer and I was taking a poetry course, and we had to do a mentor assignment where you have to read, the poet assigned us to read someone's work to see how they progressed throughout their career, right? And I wanted to do D.A. Powell, who is one of my favorite contemporary poets. And she was like, he's great, and I think you could do that, but maybe check out C.D. Wright. And C.D. Wright has this book called One Big Self. She includes a lot of her interviews, and it's lineated. It's about a prison in Louisiana, and it has photos, and it's really amazing. But that like expanded my idea of poetry, right? To like have those nonfiction elements in it. So that's also like, I had a limited view of what poetry could look like, and that helped expand it. Also, Mary Ruffley's Madness, Rack and Honey, she calls, at least the way I remember it, like, I don't even know if she says this, but like for me, it's what she said, is the moon is our first poem, right? She's like, the moon is a poem, right? And that just, I don't know, just stuff like that sticks with me. And so I'm like really, okay, if the moon is a poem, then so can this video is a poem, is this sound, right? So I think that's how I had like an expanded idea of what poems can be. And similarly to I had an expanded view of what teaching could be, right? And so what my dissertation, I'm not gonna bore you with my dissertation, but basically a lot of MFA students will have to teach first year writing as part of the curriculum because it's a required course. And I came into my MFA program not wanting to teach. I'm like, I'm just here to write, darling, like, whatever. I don't wanna teach first year writing because there's this whole idea that the students are not gonna wanna be there, and a lot of them don't. And I found that energy to be really exciting, right? Because I spend so much of my time with writers who already get it, who've had their lives transformed by writing. And that's how I feel like writing literally saves my life. I know that's dramatic, but I'm dramatic, but like, it literally saves my life every day. It gives me something to do besides drink. I haven't had a drink in 13 years, so like, I can like, thank you. But if I didn't, honestly, I believe that. And so for me, it's like, I enter the classroom that way, believing that not everybody's going to like the class. That's not the point. But if I can help someone like writing a little bit more, or like figure out how to be effective in writing, then that could be really important to them. Also, first year writing is one of the only required writing courses. So this may be our only chance to really speak to future writers. Also, a lot of it is that they don't hate writing. They've been told they're bad writers. They have negative literacy experiences, and it's interesting to write these poems for the St. Pete Pride, because I don't consider myself very political, but just with the writing, people are asking me to do things. But even in this time where books are being banned and people are literally, afraid to teach, I don't know, it's just there's so much trauma around literacy and writing. And so if we can talk to students that we maybe, I don't know, that's just really the impulse that I have, And so that's what leads my teaching, and why I love teaching first year writing. I mean, I love teaching creative writing, if anybody wants to book me for whatever, But I also taught journalism and, all these things. So that's why I feel compelled to do the work. And also, I'm gonna stop because people are like, whatever, but for me, teaching and talking about writing to people who are whatever, I don't care, makes you articulate your practice, at least for me, and what you truly think about writing and why it's, in a different way than in a class of people who are already bought in to the cult.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one more question, and we'll turn it over to the audience for questions. One of the themes that runs through all of your projects is endangered species. The landscape that you and I both love so much, this place we grew up in, disappearing, kind of vanquished and desecrated. And then also the dark corners of gay bars that are also similarly being vanquished. What's the next project? Will you carry through those themes?
The next well, there are several. Those themes will definitely carry through, but I don't know in what capacity, right? And I'm interested, I think I'm in a place right now where I'm just interested to see what emerges, and I'm not trying to project it. That's such a cop-out, but I'm just really, in this summertime mood to see what happens, But yeah, I will say though, I think that it's difficult and writing, and so for that book, I interviewed a lot of queer people about, bars closing and what we lose in those spaces, and that's the thing. I mean, I don't, not to be political, but when we can't meet together in spaces, that's really evil, right? And so I just really think that it's separating people from their community, and it's hard.
Thank you, Tyler. Questions from the audience? Sir.
Hi, Fran. Question. So, how do you, very passionate about writing, obviously, have there ever been any moments, especially when teaching, you just said, in regards to articulation, and how sometimes students, it may feel that they don't want to be there or in that class, that further fuels your passion. How do you power through that environment when you have some students who don't want to be there? How do you power through?
Did everyone hear the question?
I'm interested to hear Heather's answer about this, who is amazing teacher, writes books about teaching and craft and, all that. Because I say this with love, maybe controversial, but you're not gonna be able, I don't know, I really have thought about putting my energy into the students that are putting energy into the course. Not saying that I'm not teaching to all students, but sometimes we get hung up on that 10% of students who doesn't want to be there. And for so long, it's you take it personally, but it's okay, if they don't want to be there, you just gotta let them make their own choices, how I feel about it. Also just, acknowledging that, yeah, this is hard. Writing is hard. It's also a mode of thinking. That's the thing, right? So people feel really vulnerable. So to be hey, this may not be your thing and that's okay, but here's some tools that I have that may help you. You can take them or leave them. And that's how I feel about what I'm saying to anybody. Take it or leave it, And so that's what I feel like has worked for me, because then it's like the students who you give them the space, because we have like 16 weeks with these students, you know. By the end of it, I think most of them come around, and I think like putting too much pressure on them, at least for my personality and the way I structure my class, is just not effective. And I also just don't take it personally anymore, because we're all on our own paths. I know it's like whatever, but you know, we're on our paths and not everybody's going to buy in, but I can't let that distract me from the other students who are like almost there, you know?
I completely take it all very personally. I love teaching. I think that if you can date well, you can teach well. It's a seduction, so you just gotta be good. And it's about the bookstores, it's about reading. So I come in through that door, and I'm really, really good at finding incredible pieces of writing that are gonna speak to my students. So I'm super interested in the 9%. Tyler takes my 10%, the good ones. I'm with all the little puppies on the porch, you know, that just don't want to be there, but that my job is to make them live for this class and for it to be the best class that they've ever had. And it is, but it's because we're reading and connecting through the word. It's like preaching, and we raise each other up through the word, and then there's that incredible community that happens in the classroom. So it's the other writers, and then it's each other, and then writing comes along for the ride, and they don't even know what's happening. I'm also this is my superpower, I have no fear of bad writing. Like sucky writing just doesn't bother me at all. Some people, they're really offended by it, but I'm like, job security, baby.
I love that analogy, writing or teaching is like dating. I'm like, well, baby, I'm single, so maybe not so great. No, but I think that you hit it, and that's what we can control, is the community, right? And at least we can't even necessarily control anything, but we can like make it, right? So for me, it's about being a place where you can play around and mess around and have fun and like, you know, all of that. So to me, that's what I try to instill, is in the writing. Yeah, I also think there's a place to start with the writing.
Thank you. You had a question?
Yeah, you've done a lot of different types of writing, but on the poetry side, could you talk about whatever your poetry awakening was? You know, how old you were, or what you read that, like when you just went, wow, you know, okay, I like this and I'm going to pursue it.
Great question.
So I think that so often, at least in my experience, like young people are often really into poetry. I was a poet when I was a kid. I was writing poems about the monsters under my bed and making friends with them, you know. But then kids like to read. The Scholastic Book Fair is really popular. And then at some point, writing and reading is not cool anymore. And poetry is definitely not cool, though. I'm like, it's the coolest thing ever, you know? I don't know, it's like, what? But so anyway, I was always felt really like a poet, but then I kind of like went away from that. And then I became more focused on the journalism aspect and the nonfiction. And I always had this thing, like, poets are the coolest. I felt so, like, you know, intimidated by them. Poetry, to me, why I love poetry, it's like such an art. It's like the art form of writing. It's beautiful. It's so cool. I love it. But I'm like, you know, I was a little bit kind of intimidated. But then when I was in my 20s and I was in my MFA program, they had to do the cross-genre workshops. Like I was talking about the poetry person who asked me to read C.D. Wright, and she was like, baby, you're a poet. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, okay. And then I believed it. And so now I'm like, everybody's a poet who wants to be a poet. Honestly, that's how I feel, right? But I think in terms of craft, I've read the Bible a lot when I was a kid, and there's a lot of poems in the Bible. So I think that really kind of a lot of metaphor and allusion. That's what a lot of, in here I write a little bit about that as well. So I pull a lot from that thought. And I think that it's interesting too, because now a lot of people want to say like poetry, nobody reads poetry, nobody cares about poetry, right? And I'm like, they are trying to brainwash us. People love poetry, I feel.
They sing it every day.
Yes.
I mean, we listen to lyrics every single day. My students know more about poetry because they live in it. They live in language. So I'm authorized to call on people. Valerie, I'm looking at you. Alex, I'm also looking at you. Alex, you're up.
So I don't know, you probably get this question a lot, but what are some of the things that you do to like overcome like writer's block or like get inspired to like write poetry? Because for me, sometimes like I want to sit down and just like crank out some poems, but then I'm just like, what do I do? What am I gonna write about? So like, what are some of the tools or things that you do in order to like get words on the page?
I think having multiple projects works for me because then when I'm blocked on one, I can go to the other. Also, so the poem a day group that I was in, basically we wrote poems a day, right? But for 30 days. And that was just an accountability thing. So they didn't have to be full poems. They could have been lines of a poem. You just had to be connected to your practice. So that really, especially during the pandemic, gave me something to come back to the page. So if you're someone who really likes that works for you, I feel like accountability partner or whatever, but like a writing group, someone, that can be really helpful. I think reading a lot, going out for a walk, listening to people, honestly, just stuff like that. And just letting yourself play around, right? So if you're having a writer's block, or for me, it's just like, play around on something that is not trying to be published, can help with that, I think. What about you?
Same, just incredibly low standards. And playing, Tyler and I collaborate, having friends collaborate. I do a poem a day with Elaine Sexton, my poetry partner in Manhattan, and just having a lot to do so that you're not in your head. Taking classes, getting into an MFA program, things like that.
And it reminds me of something you said months ago about the dream state. Do you want to? I thought that was a great way to kind of get over writing block or getting into your practice.
So what
extending the dream state.
Yeah, I mean.
It was really profound to me. It was basically like right when you get up in the morning, go to the page.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a practice. And the key word there is practice, so that I'm not trying to finish pieces. I'm just trying to go to that place of concentration. So I don't believe in writing block. You just have a focus problem, so you can train in focusing. And I'm just really strict about it, going from my bed to my studio with no talking. I just have really good self-control with the devices, and it would destroy me to look at Instagram if I haven't done my writing. So I'm serious about it.
And I think too, for me, I start by revising, right? So like, if you're blocked, for me, go back and revise something. That helps get the juices flowing. I start the writing session with revising whatever I wrote the day before, right? So I think that can be something. And what's so cool about poetry to me too is like, you can move like a period, and that's a day of writing. You're like, yes, I figured it out, but like, I don't know, that gives me a little joy,
Keeping some playfulness in it, and definitely having more than one thing going, things that have some energy going. Valerie, did you have a question? And then we'll get to you.
I do. So I'm not a native Floridian, but I got here as fast as I could, and I married one. So,
Well done.
So as native Floridians, given that Florida Man is a national joke, right? And Florida is just such a difficult place to live. Now, could you talk more about representing Florida, about writing Florida, about being Floridian writers?
I think for me, it's so rooted in like my childhood, my family, my friends. Like, yes, Florida has got a lot going on, but there's so much beauty here. There are so many great people here. There's so many interesting, beautiful things. There's so much history. And I think what I always think about is how people are always like, oh, well, no one's from Florida. Like, well, this is like a whole long, marketing about, you can come and do whatever you want in Florida, use it like a trash can. You come here, you get drunk on your spring break, and then you go back to wherever you're from and whatever, right? But it's like, no, actually a lot of people live here, our communities are here, we care about it here, right? So I think people also like kind of marketed it that way as like a vacation destination. So I always think about that as in terms of like there is no history here is what people argue, or no culture. And I'm like, there's a lot, right? People have been here forever, and I think seeing that is where I kind of like my impulse. I also think my impulse too is like, this is just my version of Florida, right? And that's kind of right about in here. There are so many different Floridas, depending on where you are, depending on your embodied experience, depending on so many different factors. So I think in specificity and writing about like, this is what I see and how I view it, and what I know to be true or what I think to be true is really, I think, the only way to go about it. And also, Kristen Arnett has this really lovely essay called The Problem with Writing About Florida, in which she talks about the difficulty of representing a state that really is so diverse in so many different ways and has so many different problems, So just, I think that, like, not trying, for me, I always think like, when people ask me to write about Florida or commission something, I'm like, I get so overwhelmed because I'm like, I don't know what the problems in the Panhandle are, except for like what I'm reading. I'm not there. I'm not in South Florida, right? So I just think like, okay, well, this is my filter from it. But also, I think what's important is talking about positionality and recognizing that there are other positionalities, and writing that you don't have all the answers and that other people may have a more insightful take on it is just how I have figured it out from right now.
Okay, so my question is, I don't know if you have a writer group that you're working with right now. How do you always have the same people? How do you find one if you're looking, like, does it ebb and flow for you as a writer? Who's in your writing group and who's your trusted compadres?
Tyler and I are both very slutty.
Ethically non-monogamous.
We both have a lot of writing groups and writing partners and different relationships and creative collaborations.
And I'm in this space like where I don't want to be in a writing group. I don't know. I don't want to be beholden to anybody. I just want to like do my thing. But I do have a lot of collaborators. I think it goes for me project by project, right? So like I have some folks that I'm collaborating with that have different, we talk about it. But anyway, whatever. I think the way to find a writing group is to be in spaces like this, to be open to talking to other people in collaboration, to going to different community-based workshops with other people, maybe like the one I'm teaching, gotta plug that, whatever, it's fine. But for real though, like being present in spaces like this is the way to find other writers and just support other people, I think.
Can I add on to that? So I agree with Tyler saying like a group can be kind of a terrible thing. It often turns into just a lot of drinking and criticism, which is a different thing. So I like writing partners. So Jane Bernstein is my writing partner for my nonfiction, but I know exactly what she can do, and I send work when it's at that stage. I have a poetry partner, John Brum. It's a whole different thing. I also like reading groups where we're just reading work, but maybe not critiquing it. Like Tyler's saying, you kind of gotta figure it out yourself. I don't love groups. I don't love workshops. I think a lot of people don't know what they're talking about. I know what I'm talking about.
You gotta own it, yes.
Yeah. One more question, and then we'll hang out, sign books, chat with you. One last question.
I was struck by the fact that I was surprised to hear that your thesis is going to be in rhetoric.
Yes.
So,
We're full of surprises.
how do you feel about having studied rhetoric? It makes you look at persuasion in a different way, right? And much more kind of scientific kind of, I mean, you can be structural about it. Has that improved your writing to really look at it from that kind of rhetorical, structural, procedural perspective?
Yes, great question. But like the rhetoric and poetic were once similar, right? They were once, influenced by each other. And then, Aristotle or whatever was like, we hate the poets, we don't trust the poets, basically, right? Plato, thank you for correcting me. No, I'm like, I don't think Like, ancient rhetoric is not my, like, thing, but no, like, literally, thank you. I'm on video, I don't want to, I need to be fact checked. But in Plato, yes, we're saying we hate the poets, all of these different things, right? And it's like, okay, but, for me, they influence each other, and that's the thing, okay, like, to circle back to the academic writing, like, it's interesting because I've been able to kind of like craft my own, I've been able to like carve out my own space in this academic writing because of the way I think about language and the way I make arguments for language. And that's what why I went into a PhD in writing and rhetoric and technical communication, is because it helps me make arguments about what I'm doing in the class. It's all based on teaching, right? Like, why are we using Aristotle in a class now? Like, literally, why are we using Aristotle now that we have the internet? Some of the things that they're saying are fine, but like, there's so many different aspects to think about communication, right? Like, we can't just rely on like ancient texts. I feel. I do love Aristotle though, if he exists, because there's in some theories that he may not.
But given
Yes.
that in my mind, that brings up AI.
Yes.
What's happening in your classrooms with that?
So what's so interesting to me is when my friends write an AI poem, it's so obviously not a poem. Like, they're not doing any of the things that it has to do. It's missing that human element, the sensitivity to the line or the turn. It's just not there. Right. So I'm not worried about it at all. I don't care. If you don't want to write a poem yourself, then I just have nothing. There's nothing I can do. It'll get there, but it's not there yet. My friends have been sending me, like, it's a Shakespeare sonnet, it's a Robert Frost poem. No, baby, no, this will not pass the rubric in my class. You're not doing the things.
And I think, so this is something we talk a lot about at Ringling, because it's not just writing, it's with the art and like, all these things. But for me specifically, thinking about writing, and it's like, what do we mean? What do we mean when we mean writing? Well, for me, we mean thinking. It's critical thinking. It's thinking through a problem. So what do we want our students to actually do? And this is something why I love writing and rhetoric, is we've been talking about, like, the field has been talking about its process since the 60s. Like, it's so much more about the process than the product for first year writing, I'm talking about specifically, or just like, right? So I'm over here being like, if they can write an academic argument that gets an A or a B in whoever's class, then why do we need to do that anymore? Why don't, this is controversial, but that's why I have a PhD, darling, because I can make these arguments. But like, really, like, tell me why we need to do that instead of having students be on the page playing around, thinking more critically. I'm excited by it. Obviously, I'm like, the one part of me is like scared that I'm gonna, AI is gonna be my boss and all these things, but like, hopefully it'll be my boyfriend, but whatever. But like, one part I'm scared, as scared as like, I think, and everybody probably is, because it's such a disruption. But on the other hand, we talk so much about, people talk a lot about the problems with AI, but not so much the benefits, like for second language learners, for people, like, if we're so hung up on grammar, I love grammar. I love it. But if we're so hung up on like thinking that good writing is where to place a period, or to only use no exclamation marks, right? Then that's not really what I'm interested in teaching. I'm interested in teaching the process. So for me, that process has just changed with the tools that we have. Like Grammarly, there's been tools like word processing changed it, the computer changed it. These things have all changed the way we write and how we think. So that's how I think about it. So I also think now a lot about voice, right? So it's like, if an AI can produce whomever, like, let's figure out what your voice is, or like what a version of your voice could sound like. There are multiple voices. But that's my take on it. And that's why I'm like, for teaching wise. Also, I don't know, there's stuff like, I don't know if they can copyright. This is something we talk about. Like, I don't know if they can copyright text that's been created. So if I create a short story right now and I post it, like, someone can come take it, and there's a lot of different like financial and material things that I think that we need to think about. This is something I think a lot about, so this is a long answer, but that would be what I say about, or what I think about it.
Thank you all for coming. Tyler wrote his book, not AI. It's actually written by him.
You know what's funny? I did have AI poems in there because I started writing it years ago when I thought, ooh, AI was cool. But then when a publication came, I was like, this seems boring. Like it's no longer novel. It's no longer interesting. So I don't want it in the book.
So what you will be buying is authentic written by Tyler. So buy that book. We're gonna hang out and chat and sign books with y'all. Thank you so much
Thank
for coming.
you.
And
Such a
book
good
tour.
audience.
Thank you. Thank you.